All right. Well, Matt Rhule is reviving this roster, revamping and retooling. And I know you wanted to address the latest moves there.
Yeah, so just a lot of the questions coming in, majority were just about um the roster movement, just because Nebraska has been over scholarships. Right now, still sitting at about 94 of 85. So the latest movement, Randolph Kapai joined the portal today, late, it closes January 2nd. So which was or today. So late entry into the portal, albeit so probably the last one. There was 10 total. None of them really, big keys to this team in the previous year. One for him, Jacob Hall, punter. Javier Morton moved over to Alcorn State. Chuba Purdy, projected to potentially go to Cal or TCU. Right now, Cal just kind of slightly leads. Baron Miles, wide receiver, tight end Jake Applegate, Taman Lynham, he's over at Pitt now. Jeff Sims still undecided. Isaiah Harris, running back, and John Goodwin. So, one of the biggest things I noticed about the exits is they tend to be, outside of the quarterback, and we had one receiver, but outside of those two positions, they seem to be at positions that are, kind of stacked with either, talent that is junior, senior, kind of on the defensive side of the ball, or positions that we're strong at. So it seems like the movement is less indicative of, something they didn't like within the program, and more indicative of just, maybe they weren't the guys that thought they were going to be able to start at those positions. So I think that's another key thing to look at too, is the type of player that we're losing. Because again, a lot of Matt Rhule's ability to connect with players and recruits has been pretty evident in this cycle.
So, Justin, you're not really seeing anywhere with these transfer portal losses, it really causing much damage to any particular position unit.
No, and it's interesting because, like, the 10 out, outside of, Chuba Purdy, of course.
Yep.
Chuba is the exception, but outside of them, none of these guys were going to start. And outside of maybe them developing a little bit more, I don't think they would have ever kind of been guys at the top of the depth chart, and unless it's emergency situation where it's kind of like this year. And even more so, the transfer in, I think, is going to be more impactful than losing all of these guys. Bly Hill, just the one transfer in so far recently. We get into some of the visitors this weekend, but Bly Hill, the cornerback, we had two defensive backs leave in the portal, and we got, Bly Hill back. And then, of course, we got about, I believe, 6 defensive backs in this recruiting class as well. So, and another thing too is looking at the positions that we lost at, in this class, 2 quarterbacks, 6 wide receivers. We lost 1 wide receiver, 6 O linemen. O-line and wide receiver are biggest positions in need. We lost 1 wide receiver, got 6 in the recruiting class. We have 1, potentially 2 visiting this weekend. Offensive line is a struggle. We lost no O linemen, but we got 6 in the recruiting. Defensive line, lost no defensive linemen. Position of need, lost no linebackers, got 2 in the class. Lost 2 DBs, got 6 in the class. So he's building that foundation to where these positions don't look like they're going to be, muddied up with having too many people at this position, not enough at this position. And I think that's going to help balance out the roster and the scholarships going forward, just because, it makes it easier to fill a room than it does to fill a room and then try to, take some guys out of a different room or force their hand to get out of a different room. So,
Justin, the name that jumps out to me based on my football watching and tracking particular movement over the last couple of years during the transfer portal is wide receiver Isaiah Neer. He had a nice season 2 years ago for Wyoming, 44 catches, 12 touchdowns. He went to Texas this past season due to a lot of things going on with injuries, but also with other guys emerging.
Yep.
We know that Texas is a top 5 wide receiver room in the country. He wasn't able to get on the field, caught just one ball this past year, but again, a top level Mountain West Conference receiver 2 years ago. And he's visiting campus. He's one guy that caught my eye.
Yeah, and kind of like you said, he's 6'3", 216. So one of the things that I'm not sure, there's no, I haven't seen anything yet on whether this indicates Jamal Banks' situation, because Jamal Banks was supposed to be the other visitor, of course, at the wide receiver. So I don't know if the late addition of Isaiah Neer is just them trying to maybe potentially nail down two, because they both fit the X receiver profile that we're kind of looking for. Of course, Malachi Coleman, nobody's saying Malachi Coleman can't be that, but just Malachi Coleman, not a lot of experience, true freshman last year, did get a few catches, but they need a guy, like one of these guys, Isaiah Neer, one reception, 14 yards this past season. But, when he transferred him from Wyoming, he had some heavy hitters, coming after him. So, got injured before the 2022 season. And I think that just kind of took some of the shine off of him, because, going into 2022, he was expected to be a huge part of that offense in that receiver room. And so, I think it's another one of these kind of little diamond in the rough type of guys that maybe Matt Rhule sees that, okay, this guy was expected to come in and be a huge part of a receiver room that featured Xavier Worthy. And, outside of the, injury, he probably would have been able to do that. So, when you look at the one reception, 14 yards, not great, but if you go look at his sophomore season, it was a really good season and indicative of the talent that he has.
All right, folks, talking Nebraska with all of you. Of course, we have turned the calendar over to 2024, and you can forget about 5 and 7 in 2023, a good stepping stone for what Matt Rhule wants to establish here. I think there's no question that we could all see the building blocks being put in place, a better team, a more competitive team from week to week, and certainly couldn't quite get that 6th win. Had a number of opportunities against the likes of Maryland and Iowa and others to get that done. Couldn't quite do it, but finish up here and now are utilizing that transfer portal after bringing in a recruiting class here a couple weeks ago to put together a more competitive team in what's going to be a more competitive Big Ten conference.
Yep, and as we saw last night, just the conference isn't getting any it isn't getting any weaker, and it's the recruiting class, kind of like we've talked about before, is just, it seemed like it was the absolute perfect time to be able to kind of, this recruiting class might go down as one of the most important, not only because of course, the big fish in the pond, but the fact that, with the Big Ten getting tougher next year, recruiting is going to be a little tougher. So, trying to get Nebraska back to the forefront of recruiting, coming off this season and then going into next season with all these, new people in the Big Ten, it was going to be a lot tougher to recruit. So, even more so a reason why just he nailed it in this one. And, with his philosophy, which I can go into a little bit more later. But we saw a lot of his philosophy in this class, and it's a testament to the fact that even in this, chaotic college football world, and then even with, feeling potentially the pressure of going into a tougher Big Ten season next year, he didn't let the pressure get to him and take him away from what he knows as his foundation of his style of recruiting. He does what he does, and he doesn't get away from that, and he trusts his methods, and it's no more, this was the perfect test for it. And he still followed suit with what he's done at Baylor, with recruiting, et cetera. The same philosophies apply.
So, Justin, unless there was something else you wanted to dive into, you could certainly take that topic on that you wanted to hit on.
Yeah, first thing, I'll just go over just a couple more visitors. Of course, Dante Dowell, the running back from Oregon. I've touched on him a couple times in the previous live streams. And then Idaho linebacker Excree Alexander was another one that I saw as potentially visiting as well. And so, not this signing day, there's, just with the numbers the way they are and the portal closing today, essentially. So there's not going to be a lot more movement. So can't expect too many guys to be, I don't know if they're going to be able to take both receivers. It just depends on what their plan is going forward. But I would imagine they are trying to take as many of these guys, these 4-star potential guys, and as they can, because you still want to be able to make sure that even if you have a room, of 2 stars walk-ons, it's beneficial to have a guy who's proven and can come in and make you immediately better. So it'll be interesting to see how he navigates that and just how many of these guys are able to sign the dotted line, especially, with Dowdle being a 4-star and how he focuses on these guys and what kind of movement we see. But yeah, outside of that, I know a lot of fans were expecting, swing big and stuff like that, but we'll see. But the QB situation is still in flux as far as depth goes. We've got to be able to add, I feel like, another quarterback to the room right now. 2 true freshmen and Heinrich Harburg. Not ideal. So what I was talking about in my live stream the other day that would be difficult is finding a guy that's willing to come in and essentially accept the backup role, or the emergency backup role, but still try to find a guy that's experienced enough to be able to come in and step in, and good enough to be able to step in if his number's called, to kind of come in. So not sure if they're looking at running the 2 true freshmen out there and just rolling with that, but I would imagine they've got to have some kind of plan as far as the quarterback room goes. But getting into Matt Rhule's kind of philosophy, and I don't know if you've kind of looked into, so I'm curious your take. Have you noticed anything specific or particular about Matt Rhule's style, just from, far away, seeing him throughout college football and as a guy who knows college football? Do you see anything different as far as his style of recruiting and how he builds and why it's successful?
Well, I don't think there's any question that he's been able to tap into his previous locations, especially in Texas. So that's one thing that he's relying on. Is he's a very relational guy that obviously engages very easily with people and builds those relationships. So he's using those to continue on into the future, and mostly in Texas again, because there's more players in Texas than just about anywhere. So that would be one. I know that he's looking for speed. Everybody's looking for speed, but maybe he's putting a little bit more emphasis on it. So maybe he's going after a few guys that aren't necessarily at the skill positions that highly regarded in terms of rankings, but he's seeing more raw talent that maybe didn't produce at a super high level in high school, but that he believes that he's showing a level of confidence in his own abilities and his staff's abilities to develop guys and take maybe some players that are a little bit more raw and unpolished, believing that they can develop them.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you pretty much nailed it. So, looking into, I saw something on this a long, long time ago, back in the last offseason, and just kind of alluding to his style at Baylor and stuff like that. And essentially it's, the question that arose to me is, we're in the transfer portal world. So it's a situation where we're wondering, does recruiting mean more or less? Is it, how much less does recruiting mean? What exactly? I think we're still trying to get a grasp of in modern college football what it means. So, in a way, looking at Nebraska's class, it's both, right? It looks like recruiting means a little more and a little less at the same time. And where I'm saying more is in the fact of these guys, or where I'm saying less is these guys, right, aren't going to show up in necessarily the star rankings, kind of like you said, right? They're going to be under the radar guys. So the ranking itself, the recruiting means a little less, and as far as the ranking goes, based on Matt Rhule's style of recruiting. but where it means a little more is the type of players, kind of like you alluded to, that he does recruit. So, you know, speed and athleticism is his big calling card. You know, he loves good athletic profiles, and that's been, already been shown here. And I'll use last year's class in a second as a example. But you know, in Baylor, they were facing all of the death penalty essentially of everything that they had going on. And he's recruiting not only at Baylor, but in the state of Texas against other, big hitter Texas teams in a state where he has to recruit and be able to recruit, heavy. So that was where he came, that's where we saw a lot of that philosophy take place. He was looking for those specific intangibles, athletic profile, like I said, measurables and stuff like that. But at the same time, he wanted track guys, right? So these guys that necessarily may not have popped off on film, right? Because when looking at these guys' film, that's where a lot of these teams are like, okay, this is a 4-star, this is a 5-star, this is what I see in this guy. Maybe some guys that don't have necessarily great tape, but like they fit the specifics of what he's looking for in the other regards. And that was kind of alluded to when, I think I forget who said it. I think it was one of his staff members that's on another staff now, but he basically said that Rhule's philosophy was if he has movement and athleticism, then he can taught to be a good football player because athleticism has a ceiling. And so he's taken these guys that are, going to be what's the word I'm looking for? Just, they're not going to jump off the page immediately their freshman year. They're not going to be those guys that may necessarily come in and make a super huge impact. And that doesn't mean he's not recruiting 4 or 5 stars, obviously, but just in his previous style, those are the guys that are going to take some time to develop. But when they develop, they're going to be really good. We saw a lot of that. And what it reminds me of is I feel like he's more of a scout guy than a film guy, if that makes sense, where he's looking more at scouting the player as opposed to analyzing the film. And that's why I think his system that he has in place is so successful and why it continuously works. This year's recruiting class, for instance, there was a lot of people in this class that had family members that were dual sport athletes. I had a few of them listed here earlier. So, Vincent Shavers was a two-way player, linebacker, running back. He likes that. Amari Sanders was a dual sport athlete. 2022 was his first year playing high school football. Larry Tarver, track guy. Bly Hill, size and athleticism runs in his family. So it's one of those things where he relies on that athletic profile more so than necessarily the skill building. And so that's why I said earlier, he trusts his style because, he's still in that same breath. He's still sticking to the same exact type of player all these years later and still handled the same way, especially at a pressure filled school like Nebraska. Baylor's classes finished 28th, 25th, 32nd, and he was able to turn that into 2 Big Ten title games. And I don't know if you have any questions you want to bounce off of that, but I was going to kind of transition that over into, his first offer last year too, and how that kind of panned out this season.
Yeah, let's go that direction.
Okay, so Jalen Lloyd, for instance, okay,
Yep.
looking at Matt Rhule's first offer of when he was hired last season. So Jalen Lloyd was supposed to come on the day Matt Rhule was hired to join the track team. Okay, so Jalen Lloyd's dad was an All-American jumper at Nebraska. He's a Nebraska kid, and the day that Matt Rhule was hired, Matt Rhule offered for the football team. So he delayed his signing to the track team for a week and visited, for the football team. Now, he was the top national track star in triple jump, long jump, 100-meter, 200-meter. And the thing is, he trusts his ability to unlock the strengths, right? So he brings Jalen Lloyd in. Now, Jalen Lloyd hits the field, because of injuries, hits the field a little bit later in the season, more so than anything. However, Husker fans know Jalen Lloyd's name now because what he did this season was he was the only deep ball threat for us. So he had 6 catches for 237 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's 39.5 yards per catch. He was the only receiver other than Marvin Harrison Jr. To have over 3 50-yard catches in the Big Ten. So that in and of itself right there shows the type of player that he's doing and the type of player that he wants to make an impact. And the way he uses them is to their strength. And Jalen Lloyd is the biggest example of that. And it was the first player he targeted for a reason. And so just even we're already kind of seeing a small sample size of that pay off this season.